Hey there, and welcome. So, have you ever stopped to think that a forest, or an ocean, or even a tiny pond has a budget? Just like we do. Every single ecosystem on this planet runs on a really strict energy budget. So today, we're going to dive in and figure out how nature manages its money, how that energy is earned, how it's spent, and how it's saved.
So that brings us to the big question, right? How in the world do you calculate an ecosystem's energy budget? It's way more complicated than just counting trees and animals. We have to actually measure the energy itself. And that's the puzzle we're going to solve together in this explainer.
All right, here's our game plan. We're going to tackle this in 4 parts. First, we'll look at gross versus net productivity. Then, we'll get a handle on what biomass actually is, and of course, how you measure it. And finally, we'll connect all of that to something super important: sustainable yields. Okay, first up, gross versus net productivity. Now, the absolute easiest way to think about this is to picture your paycheck. You've got the total amount of money you technically earned, and then there's the amount you actually get to take home after all the deductions. Well, guess what? Ecosystems work the exact same way. So, gross productivity, we'll call it GP, that's the total income. For a plant, that's all the energy it soaks up from the sun through photosynthesis. But just like us, the plant can't keep all of it. It has bills to pay. And that's where net productivity, or NP, comes in. That's the energy that's left over after the organism pays for its own energy needs. This is its profit, the stuff it can actually use for growing bigger and for reproduction. So what is this cost of living for, say, a tree or a squirrel? Well, it's a process you probably heard of called cellular respiration. It's all the energy it burns just to stay alive. To move around, to digest food, to keep its cells working. If we stick with our paycheck analogy, respiration is like the taxes, the rent, and the grocery bills that get taken out before you ever see your take-home pay. And here it is, the whole concept boiled down into one simple but really powerful formula. You take the total energy captured, that's gross productivity. You subtract the energy it used just to live, that's respiration, and what you're left with is the net productivity. This little equation right here is the key to understanding how energy flows through any ecosystem. It's that straightforward. Now, it's really important to know who is doing the producing. The energy that's created by producers, like plants, we call that primary productivity. And the energy that's gained by consumers, like us animals, is called secondary productivity. But here's the most important part. It is the net primary productivity, that leftover energy from the plants, that's actually available for herbivores to eat. It is the literal foundation of almost every single food chain on Earth. Okay, so far we've been talking about energy, which is kind of an abstract idea, right? You can't really hold it. But that energy gets turned into something we can physically measure: biomass. So let's see how we go from this idea of income to the actual stuff that an ecosystem is made of. So what is biomass exactly? Well, it's the total mass of all the living things in a certain area, but, and this is a huge detail, it's the dry mass. See, the amount of water in an organism can change like crazy. So to get a consistent measurement of the actual organic matter, where all that energy is stored, scientists have to get rid of all the water first. We measure it in grams per square meter, which lets us compare, say, a rainforest to a desert. This sounds simple enough in theory, but how do scientists actually go out into a field or a lake and measure it? Let's take a little peek into the toolkit they use to basically weigh an entire ecosystem. So, the most common way to do it is the dry mass method. It's a pretty straightforward 4-step process. First, scientists go out and collect some representative samples of whatever they're studying. Step 2, they pop those samples into an oven at a low temperature to bake out all the water without actually burning the material. Third, they weigh the final, completely dry mass. And lastly, they use that small sample weight to extrapolate or make a really good educated guess about the total biomass for the whole area. Now, there are a few other tools they can use. For a direct energy reading, they can use something called a calorimeter. Basically, they burn a dry sample inside a special insulated box and measure how much that heat warms up the water around it. And like we just said, extrapolation is always the key. You can't weigh an entire forest, right? So you have to use a small, precise measurement to understand the much, much bigger picture. But, it's not always so easy. Measuring biomass definitely comes with its own set of challenges. It's not a quick process at all. It can take days to fully dry out a sample, and the equipment you need, like those calorimeters, can be pretty expensive. Plus, there's always a risk of error. If any heat escapes when you're burning that sample, for example, your final energy number is going to be wrong. It'll be too low. So why? Why do we go to all this trouble? Drying things, weighing them, burning them. This brings us to our last and, I think, most important section. This is where we connect all the dots between productivity, biomass, and a concept that truly affects every single one of us: sustainable yields. This is why this science really truly matters. This quote right here gets straight to the heart of it. Net productivity isn't just some number in a textbook. It is a physical limit. It represents the maximum sustainable yield, the absolute most we can take from a system, whether it's fish from the ocean or trees from a forest, without wrecking its ability to bounce back. Let's go back to our money analogy one last time. Net productivity is the ecosystem's profit. It's the leftover cash in the bank after all the bills are paid. A sustainable harvest means we are only taking from that profit. The second we take more, we start dipping into the savings account, the core resource the ecosystem needs just to survive. This chart shows a perfect real-world example. Fisheries. That first bar, that's the net productivity. All the new fish biomass that's created each year. That is the sustainable limit. The second bar shows a sustainable harvest, which stays safely within that limit. But that third bar, that's what happens with overfishing. The harvest goes way beyond the system's ability to replenish itself.
And the results of ignoring this limit? Well, they're predictable, and they are devastating. It leads to the collapse of fish populations, which in turn damages the entire ocean food web. And of course, it destroys the livelihoods of the people who depend on that fishing to survive. In effect, we're bankrupting the entire ecosystem.
So here's the bottom line. We have the scientific tools to calculate nature's budget. We can figure out the maximum sustainable yield. The science can draw the line in the sand for us. So the final question, it isn't really a scientific one anymore. It's a human one. Now that we know how to measure the limit, will we actually respect it?